Basically, this happened yesterday with a casual hookup, and I made what I thought was a lighthearted comment about it to show it wasn't an issue. The next thing I know, the guy has left, and that's the end of it. I already know that some things have a mind of their own, and it's not an issue for me. But did I mess up by mentioning it? Does drawing attention to it even gently embarrass someone? Have you ever left because of something like that? What should I have done instead? Edit. I said, those things always have a mind of their own, and sort of grinned. Edit 2. He had already finished at this point. We were working on a second round, so I figured it was to be expected anyway. Story 1. We are pretty sensitive about it. How we react depends on the person and how it was handled by our partner. It's difficult to come to terms with what we consider a failure. It's embarrassing and emasculating. Story 2. In all honesty, I've had this issue my whole adult life, and it's been ignored by doctors who basically just told me to use Viagra. That isn't a long-term fix, and I still firmly believe I have a physical problem that needs to be addressed. If a girl were to mention it to me in a playful way, then I would be okay with it, but then when it actually gets down to the fun part and it happens mid-sex, that's when that lighthearted attitude just goes out the window. Makes you feel terrible, in all honesty. Story 3. Yeah, it can be embarrassing as hell, especially if it has happened to him before and he's been thinking, oh no, what if it happens again? In his mind. Personally, I'd say the best option at that point is to smile, suggest making out for a while instead, and act like you still want him just as much despite what happened. If he's embarrassed enough about it, he might still leave, but at least for me, something like that would take away most of the embarrassment. Story 4. I've never suffered from this, but I did once ejaculate prematurely, which is kind of related. Felt awful. She was trying to reassure me that it was okay and that it's not a big deal, but that was the only time in my life where I've actually felt emasculated, like I was less of a man. I know and knew then that that's not the case and that it really isn't a big deal, but that doesn't change how it felt. I was mortified. I'm going to assume your gentleman caller felt something similar. That said, I wouldn't mind if you tried to lighten the mood a little. It depends on what you said, I guess. I don't speak for all men, but I think it's pretty universal that we don't like women joking about our penises not doing what they should. Story 5. It has happened to me a few times, which is super embarrassing. You handled it okay. I'm sure he is upset regardless. He should not feel bad if it was round 2 anyways. Story 6. Married man here. Honestly, this has happened to me more times than I care to admit. My wife handles it pretty well, but I always feel terrible, especially when she thinks it's because of her or my attraction to her. It never is. It's always a mental thing for me. I think of the last time it happened, hope it doesn't happen this time, which makes it happen again. It's a vicious cycle. With that being said, he should have just laughed it off. Story 7. It happened to me once. She reassured me that it was okay. We just cuddled and kissed all night until we fell asleep. I think that was the best outcome out of a situation that sucks. Story 8. It's super embarrassing, but things happen. I've only had it happen twice, and both times I said something like, the blood went to my head. I need a break so it can go back to my dick. Story 9. I went soft riding a girl once. She was attractive, and I had only had 4 beers, but I was wearing a condom. It was the middle of the day in a very hot country. I went soft anyway, and I was frustrated, but she thought it meant I didn't find her attractive and blamed herself for not being tight enough. Now I can't maintain it if I'm wearing a condom because that memory still haunts me. Story 10. I can see how this might not be obvious, but any attempt at a lighthearted joke can come across as mocking. By making a joke that it has a mind of its own, you're acknowledging that there's a problem, that the problem is the function of his penis. If you don't reassure him that it's all cool, and the first round satisfied you, or ask for him to please you in another way, there's no chance for redemption. Also, bear in mind that making light of something that someone is worried about can come across as ridiculing them for worrying about it in the first place. Jokes don't make self-conscious people feel better. I would compare it to if a girl felt really down on her appearance because she worried that she's too fat and her guy said, well, everybody wobbles around sometimes. Acknowledging and confirming her worries that she's fat and making her feel silly for worrying about them. Story 11. It's only embarrassing at first with someone new. They might think it's common. Or maybe it's common with him. The thing is, there might not have been anything you could say in that moment, which is difficult to face and unfair. Try reaching out to him, but don't focus on that. Don't even mention it. Story 12. I've had it happen twice with the same girl, and it was humiliating both times. She had some health issues down there, and there was no sensation for me. Story 13. What you said would have been a lot worse if it was in round 1 than in round 2. He finished previously and wanted to go for round 2. Not many guys can recover that quickly, myself included. I can maybe go 1 or 2 rounds, then by the third, I am too tired to continue. Story 14. I hook up with other guys, so I've seen and experienced it so many times that I'm not sensitive about it at all. It happens, and then you go back to foreplay and try again. Story 15. Very sensitive, I think, only because I have wild anxiety during sex because of my fetish. Nothing a girl could say would make me upset about it unless she was being hostile or rolling her eyes. Your comment was not bad at all. I'd probably just giggle and tell you that anxiety is a challenge and reassure you that I'm very attracted to you despite this. Story 16. If you mention it much, it can make us very paranoid and make it much harder to get an erection again. Literally, it is as simple as worrying about it happening again, and it will stay limp. The best way is to just ignore it and keep trying different things. Using your mouth in those moments can be more helpful. Not every time, but most of the time. Help him get his mind off what just happened as if it does not matter, and it will usually be able to come back if he has not gotten too nervous or uncomfortable about it. Story 17. Happens to me all the time because of nerves. I think what you said was fine. It sounds like you are pretty understanding about this sort of thing. That said, it is an extremely sensitive topic, and some guys are better at dealing with it than others. I think your approach is fine. The worst is when the woman acts disappointed or just wants to quit. Story 18. Happened to me once before. I honestly was so overwhelmed by this girl that, for some reason, I couldn't stay focused. It was definitely a very awkward moment for me. Story 19. It is frustrating and embarrassing. It happened to me once and it felt like a punch to my pride. Luckily, she didn't mind and just kept kissing me until I got aroused again. Story 20. Sometimes I get random thoughts in my head about Star Wars or some syntax errors that I haven't figured out yet. I don't know why. I told my wife and she kind of laughed at me. I mean, when stuff like that happens, I do last longer. I wasn't embarrassed, though, because she's my wife and I honestly don't really care. Story 21. I wouldn't leave, especially if it was round 2 and everything had been fun up to that point. Sex isn't just intercourse, so I'd want to continue round 2 in a different way, or just take a break and start again a little later. Story 22. In my 40s. It doesn't stay rock hard during the entire session. You just adapt the sex to the penis. When it's softer, you grind, play with breasts, switch to 69, etc. Women get dry, we get soft. Adapt. Sex isn't all about penetration. Story 23. I think you should not make any comments about it. Just continue to try to pleasure him. Kiss, rub, touch. After sex, ask him what turns him on and off, and if there is anything you could do to make sex more pleasurable for him. My boyfriend will sometimes go soft during sex. All I do is continue doing things I know he likes until he gets hard again. No big deal. Story 24. Happened to me yesterday. I drank a lot, just met the girl, so it was a bit awkward. I was extremely tired, and once we found a condom, I couldn't really get up. It wasn't the first time it happened to me, so it wasn't such a big deal for me, and there were plenty of reasons why my body wasn't working as it should. It might have bothered her a bit. I made her come a couple of times before it became an issue. Story 25. This would happen with my ex and only my ex. She made me feel terrible afterward, but when I found that I wasn't the problem in our sex life, it was a huge relief. Story 26. The main issue with it happening is that the more you worry about it as it's happening, the worse it is. The best thing a girl could do when it's happening is to do their absolute best to completely distract the guy from it and focus on turning them on with eye contact and kissing. Story 27. Literally happened to me a couple of nights ago, so I said forget it and went down on her instead. She commented about it after, and I said, it's happened before, and if it's happened once, then the risk is always there. And with that comes the anxiety that it'll happen again. This happened to me quite a few times since that first time, and it's always due to nerves, but it doesn't get to me now as much as it did before. It's a delicate subject, and how you deal with it depends on the person. Some hate jokes about it, attempting to lighten the situation, and some hate the pity or sympathy that some women try to show them to make them feel better. To answer your question, it really depends on the guy, how often it happens, and what the causes are, such as nerves or anxiety, medical condition, but it will sting for everyone, just not as much for some as it does others. Story 28. I suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder due to sexual trauma. One hookup that I had, about an hour in, I could no longer keep it up or climax. I explained the situation to her, which was terribly embarrassing and hard to do. I felt emasculated and inadequate. She was completely understanding and reassured me it was not a big deal. It made me feel better after her reassurance. We ended up hooking up the next day again, where we both climaxed. A week later, we started dating and have been ever since. Penises are complicated, and men are emotionally insecure over the slightest things, even if they don't signal it. He probably felt ashamed and humiliated and cut ties because of it. My suggestion would be, if something similar happens and if you like the guy, to reassure him that nothing is wrong. His ego will be too big to admit anything that could be linked to erectile dysfunction, but given time, that reassurance will directly contribute to a newfound confidence. Story 29. The few times I've had difficulty getting an erection, my ego took a large hit. Though the women I was with were reasonable and understanding about it, it was the most humiliating experience for me personally. I felt like less of a man. I felt broken. Thoughts of, wow, she's going to tell her friends I'm inadequate, ran through my head. I was not comfortable in my own skin. Yeah, I've bailed because I couldn't get hard. I just wanted the experience to end. You can't ask someone to continue to feel that way. Your presence can feel like torture when I'm that vulnerable, and it's not because of anything you did. Story 30. It has happened to me a few times. I do not really care. If it happens, it usually means 1, I am very tired, 2, I have an uncomfortable condom on, or 3, I guess I really did not want to engage in sex. But some men really take it to heart. Our manhood is tied to our sense of masculinity. Making a joke about it means poking fun at his identity. Do not do that. It would be like if we made a joke about you being a bad mother, not being able to get pregnant, or being unattractive right near the act of intimacy. Story 31. I wish my ex-boyfriend wasn't sensitive about it. Like, hell yeah, break time, get some water, a snack, take a nap, because when you wake, dear penis, it's go time. You're going to use all your energy up, so rest up if you want, because I'm fine finishing this in an hour or a day. But it's going to happen. He could never understand how much outer course and breaks are just fine with me. Story 32. I think most men have been there, even some of us younger guys. As mentioned previously, we may talk a big game, but one rain check from the little guy can really mess with our heads. The male ego can be incredibly fragile, especially in a moment as vulnerable as sex. I came out of a 6-month dry spell and almost immediately went soft. My date made some slightly rude comment about it, and it messed me up pretty well for my next several encounters. All that said, in the future, either let it pass without comment, believe me, he's aware, or something along the lines of it's totally normal, will do, not to say that I think your comment was out of line in the least bit. Story 33. Given that you were on a second round, it is to be expected. I can barely stay focused for 2 rounds, but yes, men are super sensitive. I feel like a lot of women don't fully realize that men are complex and have just as many, if not more, emotions and insecurities. Making that joke probably seriously injured the guy's pride, and he felt like he had to leave because he didn't know what else to do. Guys aren't expected to share their emotions, so we don't always know how to. Story 34. It happens. It can be embarrassing, especially if the woman thinks there's something wrong, especially if they think you're not into them, but I never found it that bad. It was worse for me when I was on an antidepressant. Sometimes I would just lose it, and other times I would never be able to finish, which sounds much more fun than it actually is. It's extremely frustrating. I usually just say, don't worry, it will be back, and go back to foreplay or using my hands or oral. I'm almost always right, Putting pressure on sex to be all about your performance is a good way to turn performance anxiety into erectile dysfunction. You have to relax and let your body do what it wants to without forcing it. Story 35. It usually takes me a few different attempts with a new girl to get hard for sex. It's not that I'm not attracted to her. It's just that I get performance anxiety and I fear losing an erection, which tricks my body into going soft because that's exactly what I was afraid of. Every girl I've been with, though, has been nice about it, and when I explain the situation, they have been cool about it. When it happens, I usually just go down on them for a while to make sure they aren't dissatisfied. After a few times of doing this, I will become more comfortable and able to have sex because I will be comfortable with her. Story 36. Gay experiences can vary based on the situation and how it's handled. I was once unexpectedly involved in a threesome where I was assumed to take the leading role, which was not my intention. The individuals I enjoy being submissive with are not the same ones I enjoy being dominant with. I wasn't feeling aroused in that situation. I actually wanted to be on the receiving end. I discovered that being polite, expressing my feelings, and being intimate can resolve many misunderstandings.